Something is going on in the workshop. Work? Suggested Rex innocently. Bert took no notice. I think, went on Bert, that the men are building something. What I think, he paused dramatically, is that they're building a new engine.
When I was a kid, I had no idea who Jock was. I had my copy of the complete Railway series, still do, but I had no idea about the Christopher Audrey books. I had no idea there was a litany of books that continue the Railway series, but what I did have was the toys.
Merchandising.
I had wooden railway models of Frank and Wilbert and Ivo Hugh, so I knew these toys had to come from somewhere, and then one day, I'm not sure when or how, but I saw a picture of a little yellow train, and my mind was blown. So for those of you who are like me, this is Jock. Jock the New Engine is a yellow minimum gauge engine introduced in the 34th book of the Railway series by the same name. In this book, the Arlesdale Railway is in need of another engine to run the line, and so they build a new one at their own workshop, and Douglas christens him Jock. To the best of my memory, Jock was my very first custom. But no, not that one. Or that one. Keep going. That's the one. That's right. I attempted to make Jock 4 different times, with varying degrees of success. I'll go through each one and discuss the thought behind them before I get to my official Jock custom. The year was 2010. The Gulf of Mexico was full of oil, and TikTok was just a chart-topping bop by Kesha, and not an app that ruled our lives and stole our data. And I had just learned of Jock, and needed to make a model of him. I found a bottle of yellow paint and a spare James, and began my dark work. I don't really remember much about making this custom, because when I made it, I was 10. But I know I also did paint a James Tender yellow along with it. But since then, the Tender, smoke box, and face have all been sacrificed to the custom gods. I remember that when I found it years later and salvaged what I could, I thought that the main body was beyond salvaging. The only thing I remember about actually painting this model is that even then I was unsatisfied with the paint. It was that child-safe paint that is really sticky and very slow to dry, and I could never get it to set fully, and as you can see, some of the red paint was still bleeding through. And that's really all I got to say about this poor sap. Now, let me take you to the summer of 2015. Phineas and Ferb had just ended, and Enterprising Engine 93 releases a showcase video about his Sigrid of Arlesdale custom, beautifully made by the illustrious Caleb Train. And that's when I realized what a talented artist can do with a wooden railway model. Genuinely though, that video was the spark that got me into custom making as a hobby altogether. And it was during that summer that I made a whole bunch of customs. And at the time, my favorite of the bunch was definitely my second draft of Jock. This one, like the first one, was made from a James, but specifically the Busy as a Bee James from the 2006 Adventures with James 2-pack. And the Tender is a Henry Tender, specifically from the 60th anniversary Henry. The face was from 2002 White Wheels Rheneas. Man, I was just chewing through rare models to make this Jock. I don't remember what paint I used, but I did my best to keep to his chartreuse yellow paint scheme. I free-handed most of the detailing. I didn't use tape for the lining like I do nowadays, and like a lot of people have asked, I will go into how I do lining in a future video. I just so happen to have a lot to say about this model, and its many predecessors. The Arlesdale plaque on his Tender is actually from a label maker. The label maker only prints in black and white, so I had to get a little creative with it. I was way too nervous to try and paint the yellow in red text by hand, so I improvised. I colored the white background with a red Sharpie, and I used the round-tipped clay tool that I use for painting eyes to trace the letters in yellow. He also used to have a nameplate on his boiler, but that has been lost to the sands of time. As has his face, which I genuinely don't know what happened to. Just another thing that's just been lost over the near 10 years since I made this guy. And then there's this one. And I honestly think I have the least to say about this guy because, well, I never even tried to finish him. Once again, another valiant James lost its life to my craven custom making. This one was the James Roaring Delivery Pack. I removed his cab for some reason. Not sure why, because whatever cab I would replace it with would need to have a curve, like James's already had. Yeah, I don't know. If I were to guess, I'd say it was so I could sand down the firebox, but after I gave him his base coat, I kinda just forgot about him. Either that or I just lost interest. I do know where his face went, though.
And now, the custom you all came here for.
My current Jock. The year was 2020 and... yeah, you all know. I just finished my brutal semester of engineering classes from home during the lockdown, and I needed something to take my mind off things. Obviously, this Jock was not made with a James, rather a 2015 wooden railway mic and the tender of an Emily. The first thing I did was bring this model up to shape, meaning taking a Dremel to it. A Dremel is a very useful tool for making small but smooth curves into wood. Plus it has all sorts of fun attachments. I used the rotary sander to carve out the arc in Jock's cab. When I made Rex, I used a drill for this and it turned out a lot sloppier. I also used the Dremel to carve out the arc in his tender. The yellow paint I used was pretty thin. It was the same paint that I used on the 2018 Jock, which required a bunch of coats. So I bought some gray spray-on primer, covered the plastic bits, and primed away. Now I know this is probably seen as sacrilege by the model making community, but I typically don't use primer. Usually just when I can't sand down the original paint or the paint is particularly thin. Once the primer was dry, I gave him his yellow coat. Typically it takes me about 3 to 4 coats to get an even layer of paint on as the base color, regardless of primer or not. Then I painted the wheels and sealed them with clear nail polish. This isn't the best method of sealing painted wheels because the polish can still crack as it dries, so I would definitely recommend getting some matte or gloss sealer from Mod Podge. Then I did Jock's lining. I debated having his lining go all the way down the boiler, but opted out for 2 reasons. First, because that's how the 2015 wooden railway Mike and Bert look, and also because I knew that if the boiler stripes were going to be going along the firebox, they would likely come out pretty messy and I wouldn't be able to get much tape to seal in the lining. I did freehand the arch lining along the cab, and I gotta say, I don't think it came out half bad. A few more important details. I went back and forth on whether I wanted to give him and Rex black running boards like in the Railway series, or white ones like in the TV series. I tried out white and figured I could just paint over it with black if I didn't like it, but I put white on, and I loved it. Something about the white, yellow, and red really felt right to me. I also drilled out his dome in favor of giving him a much bigger one. I was really happy to see that a 1x1 Lego cylinder stud was a perfect fit for the dome. I sanded down the top and filled the whole thing with hot glue. I started painting the dome with yellow ochre, and then finished painting it with a few layers of gold. Sometimes metallic paints can be thin and difficult to get an even layer on their own, so sometimes I like to do a base layer of a dark yellow color to get gold to really pop. Lined out his delightfully square windows and gave him his black roof. Then came the red running board and buffer beam and silver handrails. Then it came to the face. I spent some time toying around with what face I wanted to use for Jock. Now I know this isn't a super popular opinion, but I'm definitely in the camp of thinking that a lot of Clive Spong's faces look pretty similar. But that means I can just have some more fun with picking a face that just kind of fits based on vibes. It's always a fun game of figuring out what pre-existing Wooden Railway or Take-Along or Trackmaster face fits on a new character, in the case that it's not just a pre-existing engine that already has merch made of them. I decided on using the 2016 Bertram face because I felt like it had that right type of confidence to it. I'll save how I got this face from its model because, oh boy, when I get to the Bertram model showcase, I got something to say about that guy. I superglued the face on and gave the lamp a little extra coat of white to really make it shine. And there he is, Jock, in all his yellow glory. It took me a little while to give him his decals, but they were pretty easy to make. Whenever I make decals for engines, it always makes a bunch of paper waste, so I tend to group them all together and make a bunch of decals for a bunch of different engines all at once. And that, guys, gals, and everyone in between, is Jock. It took several Jameses and years of trying, but I can finally say I have a Jock that I'm very proud of. I hope you all enjoyed this installment, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.